She had been shot at in 3 different countries. She had carried wounded soldiers on her back through burning sand. She had stood in rooms where generals listened to her every word. She had earned the kind of respect that most people only read about in books. But none of that mattered to the man standing behind the front desk of a military conference center in Virginia, who looked at her like she was a lost tourist who had wandered into the wrong building. He didn't see the years of service. He didn't see the scars hidden under her blazer. He didn't see the classified missions that had shaped the course of history. All he saw was a woman. And in his mind, a woman did not belong here. What happened next would teach him a lesson he would never forget. And it would remind the world that power doesn't always look the way people expect it to. The morning sun hit the glass doors of the Naval Special Warfare Command building in Virginia Beach with a golden light that made everything look clean and polished. The parking lot was already filling up with dark SUVs and government vehicles. Men in uniforms walked with purpose toward the entrance. Their boots hit the pavement in steady rhythm. The American flag above the building moved slowly in the warm breeze. It was the kind of morning that felt important, like something big was about to happen. Inside the building, the air was cool and carried the faint smell of coffee and floor polish. The hallways were long and lined with framed photographs of decorated officers, past operations, and unit insignias. Every surface was spotless. Every door was closed. Voices came from behind those doors in low, serious tones. This was not a place for casual conversation. This was a place where decisions were made that could change the world. Commander Sarah Mitchell walked through the front doors at exactly 07:30. She was 5 feet 7 inches tall, with dark brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her navy blue blazer was pressed perfectly. Her shoes were polished. She carried a black leather folder under her left arm and a travel mug of black coffee in her right hand. Her face was calm and focused. There was no makeup on her face except a light touch of something on her lips. She didn't need anything else. She had the kind of face that looked both kind and dangerous at the same time. Her eyes were sharp, the color of dark honey, and they moved across the room with the precision of someone who had spent years reading situations before they happened. She had arrived early because she always arrived early. In her world, being on time meant you were already late. Today was an important day. She had been called to lead a high-level briefing on a joint task force operation that would bring together Navy SEALs, intelligence officers, and strategic planners from 3 different branches of the military. The operation was classified at the highest level. Only a handful of people in the entire country knew the details, and Sarah was one of them. More than that, she was the one in charge. She had been commanding SEAL teams for nearly 4 years now. Before that, she had served as an intelligence officer, embedded with special operations forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. She had seen combat. She had earned a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. She had been wounded in an ambush outside of Kandahar and had refused to be evacuated until every member of her team was accounted for. She had a reputation for being cool under fire, sharp in her decisions, and fearless in the face of danger. The men and women who served under her didn't just respect her, they trusted her with their lives. But Sarah also knew something that many people in her position had learned the hard way. No matter how many medals you earned, no matter how many lives you saved, no matter how many missions you led, there were always people who couldn't see past the surface. There were always people who looked at her and saw only a woman in a world they believed belonged to men. She had dealt with this her entire career. It was exhausting, but she never let it slow her down. She simply kept doing her job better than anyone expected. The lobby of the building was wide and bright. A large reception desk sat in the center, made of dark wood with the Naval Special Warfare emblem carved into the front. Behind it sat a man named Sergeant First Class David Mercer. He was a big man, wide in the shoulders with a thick neck and a crew cut that looked like it had been done with a ruler. His uniform was crisp, and his posture was stiff. He had a face that looked like it had been carved from rock, with a square jaw and small, dark eyes that seemed to judge everything they looked at. Mercer had been assigned to the front desk for the past 6 months after a knee injury had pulled him off active duty. He hated it. He hated the desk. He hated the computer. He hated the phone that rang every 5 minutes. Most of all, he hated the feeling that his career was slipping away from him while he sat in a chair and checked identification badges. He was a man who believed in action, in strength, in doing things the old-fashioned way. And he had very strong opinions about who belonged in the special operations world and who didn't. When Sarah approached the desk, Mercer didn't look up right away. He was typing something on his computer, his thick fingers moving slowly over the keyboard. Sarah stood there patiently for a moment, then cleared her throat softly. Mercer glanced up. His eyes moved over her quickly, from her face to her blazer to her shoes and back again. There was no name tag visible on her chest because she hadn't put it on yet. It was in her folder. She had planned to clip it on after checking in, which was standard procedure for classified briefings. "Can I help you?" he said. His voice was flat, uninterested. "Good morning," Sarah said with a polite nod. "I'm here for the 0800 briefing in conference room 7. Mercer's eyebrows went up slightly. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. "Conference room 7? He repeated. "That's a restricted briefing. Authorized personnel only." "I'm aware," Sarah said calmly. "I'm Commander Sarah Mitchell." Mercer looked at her for a long moment. His eyes narrowed. He didn't reach for his computer. He didn't check the attendance list. He didn't ask for her identification. Instead, he let out a short breath through his nose that sounded like a laugh. "Look, ma'am," he said, leaning forward and lowering his voice like he was doing her a favor. "I don't know who told you to come here, but this isn't some general briefing. This is SEAL territory. Whatever meeting you think you're supposed to be at, it's probably in the admin building across the lot." Sarah's expression didn't change. She had heard this before. Different words, different faces, but always the same attitude. She tilted her head slightly to the side. "I assure you, Sergeant, I'm in the right place." Mercer shook his head slowly. He uncrossed his arms and pointed toward the front doors with one thick finger. "The admin building is that way. You might want to double-check with whoever sent you. Conference room 7 is for operational commanders and senior SEAL leadership. It's not a place for..." He paused, and his eyes moved over her again. "It's not a place for everyone." The way he said it, the way his voice dropped on the last word, made it clear exactly what he meant. He didn't need to say the word woman. It was hanging in the air between them like smoke. Sarah took a slow breath. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but she kept it locked down. She had spent years learning to control her emotions in situations far more dangerous than this. A rude desk sergeant was nothing compared to enemy fire. "Sergeant Mercer," she said, reading his name tag for the first time. "I'm going to ask you one more time to check your list. My name is Commander Sarah Mitchell, and I'm the briefing lead for today's operation." For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes, something that might have been doubt, but it was quickly replaced by stubbornness. He shook his head again and leaned back in his chair. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've been working this desk for 6 months. I know who comes in and out of this building. I know the people who run these operations, and I've never seen your face before. So either there's been a mistake, or you're in the wrong place." He said the last words louder than he needed to, loud enough that 2 young officers walking past the desk turned their heads. They exchanged a quick glance and kept walking, but Sarah could see the discomfort on their faces. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't want to get involved. Sarah set her coffee down on the edge of the desk. She placed her folder next to it. Then she unzipped the folder slowly and pulled out her identification badge. It was a restricted access badge with her photograph, her name, her rank, and a clearance level that made Mercer's eyes widen slightly when he saw it. She held it up at his eye level. "This is my identification," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This is my clearance, and this," she pulled out a printed operations order from the folder, "is the briefing schedule for today. You'll notice that my name is listed at the top under Briefing Lead. Not attendee, not observer. Lead." Mercer took the badge from her hand. He looked at it. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at his computer screen and typed in her name. The screen filled with information. His face changed slowly, the color draining from his cheeks like water running out of a bathtub. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved back and forth between the screen and the woman standing in front of him. He started. "You can check the rest of my file if you'd like," Sarah said, pulling the badge back and clipping it to her blazer. "You'll find my service record, my commendations, and the names of the SEAL teams I've commanded over the past 4 years. You'll also find that I've been in places and done things that would make most people lose sleep for the rest of their lives. But I don't expect you to read all of that right now. I just expect you to do your job and let me do mine." Mercer swallowed hard. His throat moved visibly. He stood up from his chair, which scraped loudly against the floor. For a moment, he didn't seem to know what to do with his hands. He clasped them in front of him, then behind his back, then settled on placing them flat on the desk. Commander Mitchell, he said, and his voice was different now, smaller, tighter. I apologize. I wasn't aware. No, Sarah said, picking up her coffee and her folder. You weren't. And that's the problem. She turned and walked down the hallway without looking back. Her heels clicked on the polished floor in a steady, confident rhythm. She didn't rush. She didn't storm off. She simply walked like a woman who had been walking into rooms full of doubt her entire life and had never once let it stop her. Behind her, Mercer sank back into his chair. His face was red. His hands were shaking slightly. He stared at his computer screen for a long time, reading line after line of her service record. Afghanistan, Iraq, Special Operations Command, Navy Cross nomination, Joint Special Operations Command, SEAL Team Advisor, SEAL Team Commanding Officer. The list went on and on, page after page of service that most people could never imagine. He had made a mistake. A big one. And somewhere deep in his gut he knew this was not the end of it. The hallway leading to Conference Room 7 was long and quiet. The walls were painted a neutral grey and the ceiling lights hummed softly overhead. Sarah walked past several closed doors, each one marked with small plaques that gave no real information about what happened behind them. That was by design. In this building, secrets were the currency, and silence was the rule. As she walked, she allowed herself a brief moment of frustration, not anger. She had moved past anger years ago. Anger was a fire that burned you from the inside if you let it. What she felt now was something quieter, something more like disappointment. She had hoped that by this point in her career, she would stop running into men like Mercer. Men who looked at her and saw a mistake. Men who assumed that because she was a woman, she couldn't possibly belong in the room where the hard decisions were made. But she also knew the truth, and the truth was this. The world was changing, but it was changing slowly. And until it caught up, women like her would have to keep proving themselves over and over again. Not because they needed to, but because the world needed to see it. She reached the door to Conference Room 7 and paused. She took a deep breath, adjusted her folder under her arm, and pushed the door open. The room was large and filled with the kind of equipment that most people only saw in movies. Multiple screens lined the far wall, showing maps, satellite images, and data streams that updated in real time. A long table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Most of them were already occupied. Around the table sat 12 men in uniform. Some were SEALs, their tan faces and thick arms giving them away even in their dress uniforms. Others were intelligence officers, their eyes sharp behind glasses, and their posture slightly less rigid. At the head of the table sat an empty chair, her chair. When Sarah walked in, every head in the room turned toward her. Some of the men nodded in recognition. A few smiled. One of them, a tall SEAL with graying hair and a scar that ran from his ear to his chin, stood up and extended his hand. "Commander Mitchell," he said with a warm voice. "Good to see you again." "Lieutenant Commander Harris," Sarah said, shaking his hand firmly. "Good to see you too. I hope everyone's ready for a long morning." "Always ready when you're running the show, ma'am." Sarah moved to the head of the table and set down her folder. She looked around the room at the faces watching her. Some of these men had served with her before. They knew what she was capable of. Others were new, meeting her for the first time. She could see the curiosity in their eyes, the questions they were too polite to ask. She opened her folder and began to speak. Her voice was clear and confident, filling the room without effort. She didn't use notes. She didn't need them. Every detail of the operation was stored in her mind like a file she could open and close at will. She spoke about targets, timelines, extraction routes, contingency plans, and intelligence gaps. She spoke about risks and rewards. She spoke about the lives that were at stake and the responsibilities that came with the decisions they would make today. The room was silent. No one moved. No one interrupted. They listened because she had earned the right to be heard. And somewhere back at the front desk, Sergeant Mercer sat alone, staring at his screen, realizing that the woman he had tried to send away was the most powerful person in the building. The briefing lasted nearly 3 hours. Sarah stood at the head of the table for most of it, moving between screens, maps, and classified documents with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. Her voice never wavered. Her hands were steady. She pointed to satellite images and traced extraction routes with her finger while explaining every possible scenario that could unfold during the mission. She talked about weather patterns in the target zone, the political instability of the region, the movements of enemy forces tracked over the last 6 weeks, and the narrow window of opportunity they had to act. The men around the table listened without speaking. Some took notes, some didn't. The ones who didn't were the ones who had worked with her before. They knew that everything she said was precise and that she would follow up with written orders that mirrored her verbal briefing word for word. There was no guesswork with Commander Mitchell. There was no room for confusion. She laid out every detail like bricks in a wall, one on top of the other, until the picture was complete and solid and impossible to misunderstand. When she finished, she placed both hands flat on the table and looked around the room. Questions, she said. It wasn't really a question. It was an invitation, but also a challenge. She wanted to make sure everyone understood. She wanted to know if anyone saw something she had missed. Lieutenant Commander Harris was the first to speak. He leaned forward in his chair and rubbed his jaw with one hand. Commander, the insertion point you've identified on the eastern ridge. That puts our team within 200 meters of the secondary compound. If the intelligence on enemy patrol routes is even slightly off, we could be walking into an ambush. Sarah nodded. She had expected this question. That's correct. The margin is tight, but the eastern ridge gives us elevation and cover that the western approach doesn't. If we go in from the west, we lose both. The satellite data from the last 72 hours shows consistent patrol patterns. I've cross-referenced it with ground-level intelligence from our assets in the area. The risk is real, but it's calculated. Harris nodded slowly. He didn't push back. He trusted her judgment because he had seen it play out in the field. 2 years ago, during an operation in Yemen, Sarah had made a similar call. The team had been skeptical, but she had been right. Every person on that mission had come home alive. That kind of record earned you the kind of trust that no rank or title could give you. Another officer at the table, a younger man named Captain Torres, raised his hand slightly. He was new to the unit, transferred in from a different command just 3 months earlier. Sarah had noticed him during the briefing. He had been watching her closely the entire time, not with suspicion, but with something closer to fascination. Like he was trying to figure out how she did it. Commander, Torres said, what's our fallback if the primary extraction point is compromised? Sarah tapped the screen behind her, and a new map appeared, showing a secondary route marked in blue. We move south through this valley here, she said, tracing the route with her finger. There's a dried riverbed that provides natural cover for approximately 4 kilometers. From there, we reach a secondary landing zone where helicopter extraction is viable. The terrain is rough, but it's passable. I've walked similar ground in Afghanistan, and I can tell you it's doable if the team is prepared. Torres wrote something in his notebook and nodded. Thank you, ma'am. Sarah looked around the room one more time. Anything else? Silence. Good. I want final operational plans on my desk by 1700 today. Every team lead will meet with me individually before the end of the week to review their portion of the mission. We move in 12 days. That gives us enough time to prepare, and not enough time to second guess. Let's get it right. The room stirred as people began to stand and gather their materials. Several officers approached Sarah to shake her hand or ask follow-up questions in private. She handled each one with the same calm, direct manner. She never rushed anyone. She never dismissed a concern. But she also never wavered from her decisions. Once she made a call, it was made. That was one of the things her teams admired most about her. In a world where hesitation could cost lives, Sarah Mitchell didn't hesitate. As the room emptied, Harris lingered near the door. He waited until the last person had left, then turned to Sarah with a knowing look on his face. Rough morning? He asked. Sarah glanced at him. She was packing up her folder, placing documents back in order with careful precision. What makes you say that? Harris leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms. I walked past the front desk on my way in. Mercer was sitting there looking like he'd seen a ghost, and then I heard you come in a few minutes later. Doesn't take a SEAL to put those two things together. Sarah paused for a moment, then shook her head with a small, tired smile. It was nothing. It's never nothing, Harris said quietly. His voice was gentle, which was unusual for a man who had spent 20 years kicking down doors in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. What did he say? Sarah zipped up her folder and tucked it under her arm. She looked at Harris directly. He told me I was in the wrong place. He tried to send me to the admin building. He didn't check my credentials. He didn't check the list. He just looked at me and decided I didn't belong here. Harris's jaw tightened. His nostrils flared slightly. "That's unacceptable." "It's not the first time," Sarah said. "And it won't be the last. That doesn't make it acceptable." Sarah studied him for a moment. She appreciated Harris. He was one of the good ones. He had never once questioned her authority or treated her differently because of her gender. He followed her orders the same way he would follow any commanding officer's orders, with discipline and trust. And more than that, he defended her when she wasn't in the room, which was something she knew because other people had told her so. "I know it's not acceptable," she said, "but I also know that getting angry about it doesn't change anything. What changes things is doing the job. Every time I walk into a room and do what I do, the world shifts a little. Maybe not enough for everyone to notice, but it shifts." Harris was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "You're right. But for the record, if Mercer pulls that kind of thing again, I'm going to have a conversation with him that he won't enjoy." Sarah smiled. "I appreciate that. But let me handle it my way." "Your way usually works," Harris admitted, "even when it drives me crazy." They walked out of the conference room together and parted ways in the hallway. Harris headed toward the team rooms where the SEALs trained and prepared. Sarah headed toward her office on the second floor. The building was busier now, with people moving through the corridors carrying files, tablets, and cups of coffee. Several of them nodded or saluted as Sarah passed. She returned each greeting with a nod of her own. Her office was small but organized. A wooden desk sat against the wall beneath a window that overlooked the training grounds below. On the desk were stacks of files arranged by priority, a laptop with a government encryption seal on the lid, a framed photograph of her late father in his Navy uniform, and a small potted plant that somehow survived despite the fact that she forgot to water it half the time. Sarah sat down, opened her laptop and began reviewing the intelligence reports that had come in overnight. There were dozens of them, each one flagged with different levels of urgency. She read through them methodically, making notes in the margins of printed copies and cross-referencing data points with the operational plan she had briefed that morning. As she worked, her phone buzzed on the desk. She picked it up and saw a text message from an unknown number. It read simply, "Heard what happened this morning at the desk. Want me to file a formal complaint?" Sarah stared at the message for a moment. She didn't know who had sent it, but it didn't surprise her. Word traveled fast in a building full of people trained to gather intelligence. She typed a reply, "No, thank you. I'll handle it." She set the phone down and returned to her work, but the message stayed in her mind, not because of what it said, but because of what it represented. It meant that people had noticed. It meant that what happened at the desk was not invisible, and that, in its own way, was progress. The rest of the morning passed quickly. Sarah met with 3 different team leads, reviewed updated intelligence from the field, and participated in a secure video conference with officers at Central Command in Tampa. The conference was tense. There were disagreements about the timeline of the operation, about the reliability of certain intelligence sources, and about the level of political risk involved. Sarah listened to every argument, considered every perspective, and then presented her own assessment with the kind of clarity that left little room for debate. By the time the conference ended, the decision had been made. The operation would proceed on the timeline Sarah had proposed. The room in Tampa signed off. The chain of command was clear. Sarah Mitchell was in charge. She leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. The weight of what was ahead settled on her shoulders like a heavy coat. 12 days. In 12 days, she would send men into a dangerous situation with the hope and the plan to bring them all home. She had done this before. She would do it again. But it never got easier. The responsibility never felt lighter. Every name on the mission roster was a real person with a real family, and she carried each one of them in her heart. She thought about her father. He had been a Navy captain, career military, a man who had served with honor for 30 years. He had been her first teacher, her first example of what it meant to wear the uniform. He had taught her that leadership was not about power, it was about service. It was about putting others before yourself. It was about making hard decisions and living with the consequences. He had also taught her something else, something that she carried with her every single day. He had told her, when she was just 17 years old, and had announced her intention to join the Navy, that the world would try to make her feel small. He had said that people would underestimate her, dismiss her, and doubt her, and he had told her that her job was not to convince them they were wrong. Her job was to show them. She had spent her entire career doing exactly that. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. She picked it up and heard the voice of Master Chief Petty Officer James Carter, the senior enlisted advisor for SEAL Team 5, one of the teams under her command. "Commander," Carter said, "we've got a situation at the training facility. 2 of my guys got into it during a live exercise. One of them took a swing. Nobody's seriously hurt, but we need to address it." Sarah closed her laptop and stood up. "I'm on my way." She grabbed her folder and headed downstairs. The training facility was a separate building connected to the main structure by a covered walkway. It was loud even from the outside. The sound of shouting, weights hitting the floor, and the sharp crack of blank rounds from the shooting range. Inside, the air was warm and smelled like sweat and rubber. The main training floor was a large open space with mats, climbing walls, obstacle courses, and a section roped off for hand-to-hand combat drills. In one corner, 2 men stood about 10 feet apart, their faces tight with anger. A circle of other SEALs had formed around them, not encouraging, but watching with the kind of quiet attention that said this was serious. Carter met Sarah at the door. He was a tall man with a shaved head and a thick grey beard that made him look like a Viking. He had been a SEAL for over 20 years and had the scars and stories to prove it. He was one of the most respected enlisted men in the entire command, and he didn't rattle easily. "What happened?" Sarah asked as they walked toward the group. "Petty Officer Reeves and Petty Officer Donovan," Carter said, keeping his voice low. "They've been butting heads for weeks. Personal stuff, I think. Today it boiled over during a room-clearing drill. Reeves made a call that Donovan didn't agree with. Words were exchanged. Then Donovan threw a punch." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "During a live exercise?" "Yes, ma'am." "Was anyone else at risk?" "The blank rounds were secured at that point. But yes, it could have gone bad fast." Sarah nodded. She understood the gravity of the situation. In the special operations community, discipline was everything. A team that couldn't trust each other in training couldn't trust each other in combat. And a breakdown in trust in combat got people killed. She stepped into the circle of men. The room went quiet. Every eye turned toward her. She looked at Reeves first. He was a stocky man with red hair and a face full of freckles that made him look younger than his 31 years. His lip was split, and a thin line of blood ran down his chin. Then she looked at Donovan. He was taller, darker, with close-cropped black hair and hands that were still balled into fists at his sides. "Stand down," Sarah said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried through the room like a blade. Both men straightened immediately. Their eyes locked onto hers. "Petty Officer Donovan," she said, stepping closer to him. "You threw a punch during a live training exercise, is that correct?" Donovan's jaw worked. He looked like he wanted to say something, to explain, to justify. But under Sarah's gaze, the words died in his throat. "Yes, ma'am," he said finally. "And Petty Officer Reeves," she continued, turning to the other man, "you've been allowing a personal conflict to affect your professional conduct. Is that correct?" Reeves wiped the blood from his chin with the back of his hand. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah looked at both of them in silence for a long moment. The room held its breath. Then she spoke again, and her words were slow and deliberate, each one landing with the weight of a stone. "In 12 days, I am sending men into a situation where their lives depend on each other. Every single person on that mission needs to know that the person next to them has their back. Not sometimes. Not when it's convenient. Always. If you two cannot resolve whatever is between you, then you will not be on that mission. And if you are not on that mission, it will be because I removed you. And that will go on your record. Am I clear?" Both men answered at the same time. "Yes, ma'am." "You will both report to Master Chief Carter at 0600 tomorrow morning. He will supervise a joint training exercise that will continue until he is satisfied that you can function as a team. If either of you has a problem with that, you can tell me now." Neither man spoke. Dismissed. The circle broke. The men dispersed, returning to their training stations with the quiet efficiency of professionals who knew they had just witnessed something they would remember. Sarah turned to Carter and spoke quietly. "Keep me updated. If they can't work it out, I need to know before the end of the week." Carter nodded. "Understood, Commander. For what it's worth, I think they'll get it together. They're good operators. They just need to remember who they are." "That's the job," Sarah said, reminding people who they are. She left the training facility and walked back through the covered walkway. The sun was higher now, and the heat was building. She could feel it even through the shade. She paused for a moment and looked out across the training grounds. In the distance, a group of SEALs was running in formation, their boots hitting the ground in perfect sync, their voices carried across the open space in a low, rhythmic chant. She watched them for a moment and felt something tighten in her chest. Pride, responsibility, fear, love. It was all tangled together in a way that she had never been able to separate. These were her people. Their lives were in her hands, and she would do everything in her power to bring them home. As she turned to walk back inside, she passed by the main lobby. Through the glass doors, she could see the front desk. Mercer was still there, sitting in his chair, staring at his computer. He looked smaller than he had that morning. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and his face had lost the hardness that had been there when he had tried to turn her away. Sarah paused for just a second. She didn't stop walking. She didn't look directly at him, but in that brief moment, she felt something unexpected. Not anger, not satisfaction, something closer to sadness. Because she understood something that Mercer didn't. She understood that his behavior that morning wasn't really about her. It was about him. It was about his own insecurities, his own frustrations, his own fear of being left behind in a world that was moving forward without him. She kept walking. There was too much work to do, too many lives depending on her focus. She couldn't afford to waste energy on someone else's limitations. She had an operation to plan, a team to lead, and a mission to execute. And nothing, not a rude desk sergeant, not the doubts of strangers, not the weight of a world that still struggled to see women as leaders, nothing was going to stop her. She climbed the stairs back to her office, sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. The next 12 days would be the most intense of her career. She was ready. She had always been ready. The world was just catching up. The 12 days moved like a river, fast in some places and painfully slow in others. Sarah barely slept. She spent her mornings reviewing intelligence updates that came in from assets on the ground and satellites orbiting thousands of miles above the Earth. She spent her afternoons in meetings with team leaders, logistics officers, and communications specialists. She spent her evenings alone in her office, going over the plan again and again, looking for weaknesses, looking for gaps, looking for anything that could go wrong, and planning for it. Every decision she made during those 12 days carried weight. The type of helicopters used for insertion, the timing of the approach, the number of operators on the ground, the communication frequencies, the medical evacuation plan, the rules of engagement. Every single detail was a thread in a web, and if one thread broke, the whole thing could fall apart. Sarah knew this. She had seen it happen before. She had been part of operations where a single miscalculation had turned a clean mission into a disaster. She had carried that knowledge with her ever since, and it made her careful in a way that some people mistook for caution. It wasn't caution, it was precision. On the 8th day before the operation, she received an updated intelligence report that changed the picture. A source on the ground had reported that the primary target had altered his routine. He was no longer spending his nights in the main compound. Instead, he had moved to a smaller building about 400 meters to the south. The building was not on the original plans. It had not been photographed by satellite because it was partially hidden beneath a canopy of trees and camouflage netting. Sarah read the report 3 times. Then she picked up the phone and called Harris. "We need to meet." "Bring Torres and Carter. My office." 30 minutes. When the 3 men arrived, she closed the door and pulled up the new intelligence on her laptop screen. She turned it around so they could see. "The target has moved," she said. "New location. 400 meters south of the original compound. We don't have detailed imagery yet, but I've requested an updated satellite pass within the next 24 hours. Harris leaned forward, his eyes scanning the screen. "That changes our insertion angle. It changes everything," Sarah said. "The Eastern Ridge approach was built around the original compound layout. If the target is now in this secondary building, we need to rethink our positioning. The ridge still gives us elevation, but the sightlines are different. And the distance between the 2 buildings means we might need to split the team." Torres, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Splitting the team increases risk. If one element encounters resistance, the other element might not be able to provide support in time." "I know," Sarah said. "That's why I'm not making any changes yet. We wait for the satellite imagery. We verify the source's information, and then we adjust. But I want each of you to start running scenarios based on this new data. I want options on my desk by tomorrow evening." Carter, the Master Chief, rubbed his shaved head and let out a long breath. "Commander, if I may, the boys are ready. They've trained hard. Whatever adjustments we need to make, they'll handle it. But they need to know the plan is solid. If we start changing things at the last minute without clear reasons, it's going to shake confidence." Sarah looked at him steadily. "That's exactly why we're doing this now and not on the day of the operation. I won't send anyone into a situation with outdated intelligence." "The plan changes because the situation has changed. That's not weakness. That's leadership." Carter nodded. "Understood, ma'am. Just wanted to put it out there." "And I appreciate it," Sarah said. "That's what I need from each of you. Honest input. No filters. If you see something I'm missing, tell me. If you think I'm wrong, tell me. We're going to get this right because we're going to be honest with each other." The three men left her office with their assignments. Sarah turned back to her laptop and began redrawing the operational map herself, marking the new target location, adjusting distances, calculating timing. She worked for hours, the room growing dark around her as the sun set outside the window. She didn't turn on the light until she could barely see the screen. Over the next 4 days, the new satellite imagery came in and confirmed the source's report. The target had indeed moved to the secondary building. The structure was small, 2 rooms, with a single entrance and no windows facing north. It was surrounded by a low wall made of stone and mud. There were signs of activity, footprints, tire tracks, and a generator that ran at night, suggesting the target was living there with a small security detail. Sarah assembled her team one final time on the day before the operation. They met in Conference Room 7, the same room where she had given the original briefing 12 days earlier, the same room that Mercer had tried to keep her out of. She stood at the head of the table and looked at the faces around her. These were the men who would carry out the mission. SEALs, intelligence officers, communications specialists, and medical personnel. Each one of them had been selected for this operation because they were the best at what they did. And each one of them was looking at her with the kind of focused attention that told her they were ready. Sarah laid out the revised plan. The team would be split into 2 elements. Alpha element would approach the secondary building from the east, using the ridge for cover and elevation. Bravo element would loop around from the south and secure the perimeter of the original compound to prevent any reinforcement or escape. The 2 elements would be in constant communication, with Sarah monitoring everything from the Tactical Operations Center aboard a Navy ship positioned 30 miles offshore. She walked through every detail. Entry points, breach sequence, room clearing order, communication protocols, emergency extraction procedures, medical evacuation routes. She covered every scenario she could imagine, and a few that only someone with her experience could have anticipated. When she was done, she paused and looked around the room one more time. "This is the plan," she said. "It's solid. It accounts for what we know and what we don't. But plans are only as good as the people who execute them. And I trust every single one of you to do your job. I trust you with my career, with my reputation, and with the lives of the people sitting next to you. Don't make me wrong." The room was silent for a moment. Then Harris spoke. "You've never been wrong about us, Commander." A few of the men nodded. Someone in the back cleared his throat. The tension in the room wasn't fear. It was the kind of energy that comes before something significant. It was anticipation. It was readiness. "Get some rest tonight," Sarah said. "Tomorrow we go to work." The room emptied slowly. Men shook hands, exchanged quiet words, and filed out through the door. Sarah stayed behind, standing alone at the head of the table. She placed her hands flat on the surface and bowed her head for just a moment. She wasn't praying. She was organizing her thoughts, clearing her mind, preparing herself for what was ahead. She had learned long ago that the moments before a mission were like the moments before a storm. Everything was quiet, but the air was charged. She left the building late that evening. The parking lot was nearly empty. The sky above was dark and full of stars. She walked to her car, got in, and sat there for a moment without starting the engine. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. It was old and worn at the edges. In it, her father stood in his navy dress whites, smiling at the camera with the kind of pride that only a man who had served his country could carry. Next to him stood a young girl, maybe 10 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes. She was wearing a sailor hat that was too big for her head, and she was saluting with the wrong hand. Sarah looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in her pocket. She started the car and drove home. The operation launched at 0200 the following morning. Sarah was aboard the USS Resolute, a guided missile destroyer positioned in the waters off the coast. The Tactical Operations Center was buried deep inside the ship, a dimly lit room filled with screens, keyboards, and the soft hum of encrypted communication equipment. Sarah sat at the center of it all, wearing a headset, watching feeds from multiple cameras and drones that gave her a real-time view of the target area. She could hear the breathing of the operators through the headset. She could hear the soft crunch of boots on sand. She could hear the whispered commands as Alpha Element moved into position along the eastern ridge and Bravo Element circled south toward the compound. "Alpha in position!" Harris's voice came through the headset, calm and steady. "Bravo in position!" Carter's voice followed, equally controlled. Sarah looked at the drone feed. The secondary building was dark. The generator was running, casting a faint glow from beneath the door. 2 guards were visible outside, one leaning against the wall and the other sitting in a plastic chair with a rifle across his lap. "All elements, this is command," Sarah said into the microphone. Her voice was flat and clear, the voice of someone who had done this before and knew that every word mattered. "Stand by for green light." She looked at the clock. She looked at the drone feed. She looked at the positions of her teams. Everything was aligned. Everything was according to plan. Green light. Execute. 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 The next 3 minutes and 47 seconds were chaos. Controlled chaos. The kind that only the best trained warriors in the world could manage. But chaos nonetheless. Alpha Element moved down the ridge in a fast, silent descent. The 2 guards outside the building were neutralized before they could raise an alarm. The breach team stacked on the door, placed a charge and blew it inward with a sharp bang that echoed across the open terrain. Inside the building, shouts erupted. Gunfire cracked in short, precise bursts. Sarah listened to every sound through the headset, her eyes moving between the drone feed and the team's body camera footage displayed on the screens around her. "Room 1 clear," a voice reported. "Room 2, contact. 2 hostiles down. Target identified, target secured." Sarah exhaled. She hadn't realized she had been holding her breath. "Confirm target identity," she said. A long, terrible pause that lasted maybe 5 seconds but felt like an hour. Then Harris's voice came through, solid as granite. "Identity confirmed. Target is in custody. All operators accounted for. No friendly casualties." The operations center erupted in quiet cheers. People clapped. Someone pumped a fist in the air. A communications officer leaned back in his chair and whispered something that sounded like a prayer of thanks. Sarah didn't cheer. She didn't clap. She sat perfectly still in her chair, her hands resting on the console in front of her. She closed her eyes for just a moment and let the relief wash through her. Then she opened them and spoke into the microphone. "Outstanding work, all elements. Proceed with extraction. Stay sharp until everyone is back on the ship. Command out." The extraction went smoothly. The helicopters came in fast and low, kicking up clouds of sand as they landed. The teams loaded up in under 4 minutes. By the time the sun began to rise over the horizon, every operator was back on the ship, the target was in custody, and the mission was complete. Sarah left the operations center and walked up to the main deck. The morning air hit her face, warm and salty. The ocean stretched out in every direction, grey and endless. She leaned against the railing and watched the horizon brighten from dark blue to orange to gold. She was exhausted. Her body ached from hours of sitting in one position, and her mind was still buzzing with adrenaline. But beneath all of that was a deep, steady sense of accomplishment. She had done her job. Her teams had done theirs. Everyone was coming home. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in a different room. This one was smaller, quieter, with wood-paneled walls and an American flag in the corner. It was a conference room at the Pentagon. Across the table sat a panel of senior officers, including an admiral and 2 generals. They had called her in for a debrief and a commendation. The admiral, a tall man with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons, spoke first. "Commander Mitchell, the success of this operation is a direct reflection of your leadership, your planning, and your ability to adapt under pressure. The intelligence community, the SEAL teams, and the Joint Chiefs are all in agreement. This was an exceptional outcome." Sarah sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Thank you, sir. The credit belongs to the teams. They executed flawlessly. The Admiral smiled slightly. They executed flawlessly because they were led flawlessly. Don't be modest, Commander. You've earned this. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a citation and a recommendation for promotion. Sarah opened it, read it, and closed it again without expression. We'd also like to discuss your future, the Admiral continued. There's a new position opening up at Joint Special Operations Command. It would put you in charge of coordinating special operations across all branches. It's a significant step, and frankly, there's no one better suited for it. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'd be honored, sir. The meeting ended with handshakes and formal words. Sarah walked out of the Pentagon into the bright afternoon sun of Washington, D.C. The city moved around her in its usual rush of traffic, people, and noise. No one on the street knew who she was. No one on the street knew who she had done. She was just a woman in a navy blue blazer walking down the sidewalk, and that was fine with her. She had never done any of it for recognition. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. 3 days after the Pentagon meeting, Sarah returned to the Naval Special Warfare Command building in Virginia Beach. She walked through the front doors at her usual time, carrying her black folder and her travel mug of coffee. The lobby was the same as it always was. Clean, quiet, professional. But something was different. Mercer was standing behind the front desk, not sitting. Standing, and when he saw Sarah walk through the doors, he straightened up like someone had pulled a string attached to his spine. His face was different too. The hardness was gone. The dismissiveness was gone. In its place was something that looked very much like shame. Sarah approached the desk. She didn't slow down. She didn't prepare herself. She just walked, the way she always did. Good morning, Commander Mitchell, Mercer said. His voice was quiet, respectful. He held out his hand. Sarah looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. She saw the effort it was taking him. She saw the discomfort. She saw the struggle of a man who was trying to be better than he had been. She shook his hand. Good morning, Sergeant Mercer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mercer swallowed hard and said, Commander, I owe you an apology. What I did that morning was wrong. I made assumptions I had no right to make. I disrespected you, and I disrespected everything you've done for this country. I'm sorry. Sarah looked at him for a long time. She could have said many things. She could have been cold. She could have reminded him of how it felt to be dismissed, to be reduced, to be judged by nothing more than appearance. She could have made him feel the same smallness he had made her feel. But that wasn't who she was. I accept your apology, she said, and I appreciate you saying it to my face. That takes courage. Mercer's shoulders dropped slightly, like a weight had been lifted. I've been reading about you, he said, about the things you've done, the missions, the commendations. I didn't know. And that's on me. I should have known. Or, at the very least, I should have given you the respect of checking before I opened my mouth. Sarah nodded. You should have. But here's the thing, Sergeant. It shouldn't matter what's in my file. The next woman who walks through those doors might be a junior officer on her first day. She might not have a file full of commendations. She might be nervous and unsure of herself, and she deserves the same respect I do. Not because of what she's done, but because of where she is. She's here. That means she earned the right to be here. Mercer was quiet. He looked down at the desk, then back up at her. You're right, ma'am. I'll do better. I believe you will, Sarah said. She picked up her coffee and her folder and walked down the hallway toward her office. Her heels clicked on the polished floor in that same steady rhythm, the sound of a woman who had never needed anyone's permission to be exactly where she was. Behind her, Mercer watched her go, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't see a woman walking down the hallway. He saw a commander. He saw a leader. He saw someone who had changed the way he understood the world, and somewhere in a photograph tucked inside a jacket pocket, a father in navy whites stood smiling next to a little girl in a sailor hat too big for her head. She was saluting with the wrong hand, but she was saluting, and that was all that mattered. Sarah sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and got back to work. There were new missions to plan, new teams to lead, and a new position at Joint Special Operations Command waiting for her. The world was still full of people who would doubt her, underestimate her, and try to put her in a place they thought she belonged. But Sarah Mitchell had spent her entire life proving that the only place she belonged was wherever she decided to stand. And she wasn't done yet. She was just getting started.